I think it's pretty safe to say that we all have opinions about grades and who should be grading and what grades mean and whether or not they're important. And a lot of us are more than ready to argue about our opinions on the internet. But the thing that all of these opinions have in common is that they're just opinion. And that according to science, they're probably all wrong. But they're probably all also right. Now, you've probably heard a climber say something like, grab that jug, only to grab it and realize it's not at all a jug. And you've probably just chalked that up, no pun intended, to they're stronger and this must feel like a jug to them. And that's partially true. But if you're a sports fan in general, like I am, you've also heard athletes say things like, the ball just looked bigger, or everything moved slower, or the hoop seemed so small that I just couldn't get the ball in it. And sprinter Kendall Ellis, who closed a nearly impossible gap while running a winning anchor leg on the 4x400 relay at the NCAA Championships, said this.
One, I didn't know how big the gap was, to be honest. I didn't think it was that big when I was running.
She didn't think the gap looked that big? I mean, just look at it. With 100 meters left to go, you and I are definitely not catching the leader. That gap is enormous. But that's because we aren't Kendall Ellis. We aren't that fast. We aren't collegiate record holders in the 400. We don't train in a culture at USC that many people have nicknamed Quarter Mile University. And it's not just that Kendall Ellis understands that with her speed she can close that gap. What science says is actually happening is that she believes the gap to be physically smaller than it is. Her perceived reality is different than what we see in that photo. Great hitters actually believe the ball to be physically bigger. Great shooters believe the target to be physically bigger. Kendall Ellis really thought the leader was physically closer to her. So maybe these climbers think the holds are actually bigger than they are, or the moves actually smaller. Not just easier for them, but objectively different than the reality. So our grading might be way off. All of us. Yes, that includes you. Now, sports science calls this phenomenon embodied perception, and it's fascinating. But before we go any further, let me say this. I'm exploring grades because I believe they're an important part of understanding your own progression, and how we view them can alter how we work toward that progression. I understand that grades will always be subjective, and I'm not trying to change that. I'm simply asking questions that might help some people find a better way to understand those grades, and as a result, progress more efficiently in a more healthy way. Okay, so embodied perception. Let's take golf as an example. Researchers will ask golfers to putt to various holes on a green from various lies. Some of the holes they're putting to are actually larger than regulation, and some are smaller than regulation. But time after time, the result is the same. The better golfers perceive the hole to be bigger, even when they're putting to the smaller holes. The golfers with less skill think they're putting to the smaller holes. The difficulty of the putt itself also changes the perception. When the putt's going to be tricky, the good golfers think the hole's either regulation or smaller. And in that situation, the less skilled golfers often perceive the hole as even smaller. Both groups are rarely correct, and I mean correct in terms of objective reality. They're no better than just randomly guessing. But there is a group who's a little better at saying which hole they're putting to. Non-golfers. People who have no skill often are better at the objective measurement. And this happens in sport after sport and study after study. And the theory is that when a person has the ability to act upon an environment, a golfer has the skills to make a certain putt, they perceive the environment differently, the hole as bigger. When there are enough skills to know that it's going to be hard, then the hole looks smaller, seems smaller. The person who has no skills at all and doesn't know any better can be a little more objective about the environment. But golf isn't climbing. And there have been some studies into embodied perception and climbing, but mostly looking at different areas of perception, so they aren't really usable here. Now, the closest I can find that speaks to what I'm trying to understand is a study from parkour. Now, what they did was set up blank walls of different heights. Athletes had to then look at the wall and lay out on the floor how tall they thought that wall was. The better parkour athletes, the ones who had the actual skills to climb over the wall, thought that the wall was shorter than it really was. And the less skilled athletes who couldn't make it over perceived it as taller than it really was. Best at estimating the height were the people who had no skills to climb over any of the walls. Now, this idea, embodied perception, in my mind, it really throws a wrench into grading climbs. First of all, a non-climber isn't going to be good at giving the difficulty rating because it's not an objective measure, and it's impossible to understand it if you aren't a climber. But also, in my last couple of videos about grades, there were a lot of comments saying things like, grade corresponds to the size and angle of holds, and that's not at all correct. But I think people want it to be correct because those are the only objective things we can measure. Except our perception of those holds isn't at all objective. If we have the skills to use that hold, we probably think it's objectively bigger. If we don't, we think it's objectively smaller. Not just easier or harder, objectively different than reality. So if your partner's calling a hold a jug that you believe is objectively not a jug, well, you might both be wrong. And when it comes to our own progression, this is all good to know. We can find ways to change our perception, and we often do throughout the red point process. And I now think that's a big part of what working a climb is all about, finding new ways to update our own embodied perception until we believe this thing objectively easy enough that it's going to be hard to fail. And of course, one important way to continue changing our embodied perception is to keep gaining a better ability to act on our environment, to climb harder. And if you think you're strong enough, but just lack the ability to apply the appropriate effort, whether intensive or extensive, check out my free Try Harder Toolkit. It's a 1-hour video series that explores the tools needed to try harder or try longer and to manage that effort on the wall. Link is in the description. But I also think that embodied perception further supports this overlapping model of our grading scale that I presented in my previous video. And I'm not saying that we should be updating all of the guidebooks to show this scale. I'm saying this is how we should perceive the scale. This is how we should understand it. We can still give a single number, but we have to understand that it might be anywhere in this range. And that means a lower number might actually seem harder than what we've just climbed. It's like the old Mitch Hedberg joke.
I think Bigfoot is blurry. That's the problem. It's not the photographer's fault. Bigfoot is blurry.
Grades are blurry. And all of this makes me further believe that if you're absolutely positive about a grade and there's just no wiggle room, then you might be in the midst of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't really have enough knowledge to know that you're wrong. But when the grades start blurring together a little and it's hard for you to tell V5 from V6 from V7, then you might actually be seeing the grades more clearly. All right, see you next time.